Welcome to today's webinar. We are going to get started now. So thank you and for joining us today on our energy efficiency panel discussion. Before we bring in the speakers for today, just a few housekeeping points. The audio controls can be found in the audio menu, so you can adjust your speaker settings. Make sure your speakers are turned on if you're using them, and plugged in if you're using headphones. You can also change the video settings. You can see that side to side, and change it to presenter, presentation and presenter. And for any questions, just feel free to use the Q&A feature. Go ahead and put your questions in there throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them throughout this session. And yeah, so thank you to our sponsors, Fortis BC and Wyse Meter Solutions, for sponsoring this panel discussion on energy efficiency in residential buildings. Without their sponsorship, we wouldn't be able to do this. So again, thank you so much for sponsoring this. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Jordan right now. I'm just going to stop sharing our screen here. Jordan, welcome.
Thanks, Hunter.
So, yeah, so Jordan Fisher is widely recognized as one of BC's top experts in cost-effective energy and water efficiency strategies for apartment buildings. He has 15 years experience in the industry and has led efficiency projects in 40,000 units throughout British Columbia, which is pretty impressive, a number itself. So Jordan has helped the apartment building owners save millions of dollars in utility costs and obtain millions of dollars in rebates and incentives. He's led the development of LandlordBC's Operation Cost Cutter. You can find more information about that in our members only section. And he leads Fortis BC's rental apartment efficiency program. Jordan is also a small scale landlord, so that's great that you have that insight from both the energy efficiency business side of things, but also as a landlord yourself. You own a handful of units, and he's always striving to view potential investments in his clients' buildings through the lens of a landlord. So I'm going to turn it over to Jordan just to make a bit more of an introduction about himself and Fresco Building Efficiency.
Thanks, Hunter. So yeah, my name is Jordan Fisher. So Fresco is an energy efficiency and engineering consulting firm. We're based in the Vancouver area, but we actually operate throughout all of BC and a little bit in Alberta. We primarily specialize in apartment buildings, although we work in a variety of other building types, including a fair bit of commercial. We've done over 1,000 apartment buildings, work in over 1,000 apartment buildings, again, mostly in British Columbia. We have a team that includes energy analysts, mechanical and electrical engineers, project managers, and financial analysts. We've been really happy to have had a great opportunity to work with LandlordBC over the last several years. As Hunter mentioned, we've helped develop and operate their Operation Cost Cutter program. Basically, that's a program that provides free support to LandlordBC members to basically help them get rebates and sort of help them through the process of doing energy efficiency upgrades. And related to that, we also run, as Hunter mentioned, the Fortis's rental apartment program, and now more recently also a commercial energy assessment program. So those are really great programs. And so we call the RAP program, which is the one primarily focused on rental buildings. It's really great because it provides landlords with free energy audits, free engineering support to help them design systems and help them through the process of hiring and overseeing contractors, as well as providing them free installations of shower heads and aerators. We've also run a number of pilot projects with a number of LandlordBC members and other companies, basically try to test out different technologies. So a new technologies on the market, we can get involved in helping to test those technologies and try to estimate how cost effective they are, how much energy they actually save. We also do some energy benchmarking. So that's where we look at a large group of buildings and look at how those buildings perform from an energy performance standpoint and how that changes over time and how buildings compare to one another. And yeah, really grateful to have had an opportunity to work with so many landlords and LandlordBC members over the years, and hope to have a chance to work with some more of you in the future.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jordan. Before we bring in Peter, because he's actually having a bit of a technical difficulty at the moment, he wasn't able to get through. So what we're just going to look at some of the questions that have come in about building efficiency. And I guess really the biggest question, oh, actually we have Peter now. Perfect. So I'm going to, hi, Peter. Perfect, you're able to get through.
Yeah, sorry, I was having some connection issues here on my end. My apologies, everyone.
No problem, it's perfect timing. Actually, just about to introduce you. So this is Peter Mills. He's co-CEO of Wyse Meter Solutions and has been involved in the energy management industry for over 25 years and has delivered energy management projects to over 300 multi-residential suites across Canada. He co-founded the privately held Stratacon in 1997, which was acquired in 2008. In 2011, he launched the Multi-Logic Energy Solutions Incorporated to deliver cost-effective energy solutions for multi-residential sector across Canada. And prior to his work in the private sector, Peter worked for Ontario Hydro for 10 years in a variety of executive positions. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter now, just to make a bit more of an introduction about himself and Wyse Meter Solutions.
Thanks very much, Hunter. Appreciate the introduction. So a little bit of background about Wyse. Wyse is solely focused fairly much on the multi-residential sector across Canada in terms of delivering utility submetering. We operate in about 2,000 multi-residential buildings coast to coast. We have an extensive network of properties that we operate in BC. But we also operate across the country all the way to PEI and Halifax as well. We currently have over 190,000 suites under long-term utility metering and billing contracts, where we provide the supply, installation of all sub-unit submetering equipment, as well as ongoing resident billing, collection, and remittance services to the landlord. And we deal in new construction as well as retrofit in multi-residential, condominium strata, purpose-built rental, and commercial buildings. So that's a little bit of background about Wyse, and we enjoy the BC market very much.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter. As I was going to say there, so we can now get into some of these questions and have a bit of a conversation about energy efficiency. So, I mean, really, the first question, and it's really actually for both of you, is why should I care about building efficiency and energy efficiency? Why should a landlord, why should the average landlord care about this? Jordan, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. So I guess there's a number of reasons to care about energy efficiency. I mean, in all honesty, the number one reason that we see landlords are interested in this really just has to do with cost management. You know, we're in a period of unbelievably low cap rates. We have pretty tight rent increase restrictions, and at the same time, we're seeing a lot of different operating costs going up very quickly, and in fact, in many cases, going up much faster than allowable rent increases. So, you know, we're at a point where landlords really need to control operating costs. It's essential. It's no longer, when I started, it was all about becoming more profitable. Now it's in many ways about not becoming less profitable. And energy efficiency is just one of the few areas you really have to really help control your operating costs. And it's very cost effective. It would be a very high return on investment. On the strict financial side of it, we do see increasingly a lot of landlords are just genuinely interested in reducing their environmental impact. Some of our large, sort of more like pension fund type clients have really strict standards now on their environmental performance, and they're really working to improve that. Others are smaller players that are just genuinely interested and be good members of the community. And also we generally, we look at energy efficiency as just integrated within good building operations, and we just want to have buildings that operate well and that are comfortable for tenants and are easier to operate and less headache for the landlords. And so we tend to focus on putting in place really good systems, and part of that is systems that operate really efficiently.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that, and those are all excellent points, Jordan, and something we certainly promote as well. And I guess one of the things that we would also add is that our the residents that are moving into the rental buildings across the province are always demanding more from their landlords, and they want choice, and they want to understand that they're going to be living in a more sustainable building. So by implementing energy management, energy efficiency technologies, and submetering, it certainly gives the residents more comfort that they're moving into a property that they can enjoy as their home, as a sustainable and more efficient home in the future. So I think that's an important aspect of anything that's being done from an energy efficiency standpoint.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And one more comment I would just add is this is something that's a more recent development, and we're really only seeing our kind of largest customers are really focused on it, and that's trying to get ahead of regulation. So there is a lot of talk right now, and so far it's not clear what exactly is going to change. But both, for example, in the city of Vancouver and also at a provincial level in BC, there is a move towards much more stringent regulation around energy use and greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. So we don't know exactly what those rules and regulations are going to look like yet, but certainly all the signs are pointing towards stricter and stricter requirements for all kinds of buildings for operations. And so some of our customers are saying, well, they see that coming, they know their buildings aren't that efficient, and they really want to get ahead of that so that when those regulations come, that they've already got really well-performing buildings, and they're looking at other jurisdictions in places like New York City, where there's already very strict regulations. They're saying, well, if that comes here, we're really behind the 8 ball, so let's try and get ahead of it.
Perfect, thank you both. So Peter, you used a term in there, submetering. Simply put, what is submetering?
So submetering is essentially the suite level metering of all utilities within a building. So submetering allows you to meter and measure the amount of in-suite electricity, in-suite water use, in-suite thermal energy use or natural gas use on an individual suite basis. And then we take that measured consumption and provide billing on a monthly basis to the residents in the suite. So it's really converting the building to become a full user pay model where the residents are only using and only paying for what they use.
Great. And I mean, so what is the impact on tenants to submetering?
So I guess the biggest impact to tenants is one, they become responsible for their exact energy use. So they're not having to pay for their wasteful neighbors anymore. And that's, we see that as a big benefit. Typically in most multi-residential buildings, about 10% of the residents are using 25% of the overall energy in suite. So you've got a very small portion of residents that are high users, and all of the other residents in the building are really subsidizing those high users unless you're submetered. So submetering sort of eliminates and creates a perfectly fair billing allocation of tenant energy use. And then the other nice thing is, because we're able to combine multiple services onto a single bill, residents are only having to deal with one utility bill each month, one security deposit, one administration fee. So it's a much more cleaner, clearer, easier process for residents to pay multiple utilities in suite each and every month.
And that makes sense. I mean, most people want to be energy and resource efficient, and I think the easiest way of doing that is by actually seeing what you're using. So, you know, when in those buildings where heat and hot water is included, it becomes really difficult to see that for sure. So I'm going to you, Jordan. What are some of the tools that landlords have? What are some of the programs or incentives that are available for landlords?
Yeah, so this is actually a really great time for landlords in that there are a lot of opportunities available. When I started working in the multifamily sector many years ago, there really wasn't a lot of opportunity for landlords. Energy efficiency programs tended to either be focused on single family homeowners or really large commercial buildings or institutional buildings. And so that's really changed over the last several years. And LandlordBC has actually been pretty instrumental in trying to get more utility offerings and more energy efficiency offerings specifically for rental apartment buildings. So one of the best examples probably of this sort of encapsulates all these things is the Fortis rental apartment efficiency program. So that has a few different things that it offers. So the first is it offers free energy assessments, or sometimes called energy audits. And basically what that means is an engineer looks at the building's energy use, looks at the physical building and its components, and then basically outlines what are the opportunities to save energy, what kinds of upgrades could you put in place, how much do those cost, how much do those save, what's the return on investment, basically what's the business case for these different options. So that's the energy assessment. For landlords that want to go forward with some of those major upgrades, it also provides what they call implementation support. And so basically what that is you know, essentially kind of consulting services that you might normally hire a firm like ours to provide. Fortis will actually pay for those services. So that could include helping develop specifications for a new mechanical system upgrade, heating system upgrade, let's say, helping you go out and find the right contractor, oversee that contractor's work. And then the rebates. So there are rebates, and actually Fortis has recently increased the rebates as part of a COVID response. So these are actually the best rebates we've really ever had right now for, well, for actually many different sectors. And so that most common ones for residential landlords in BC are for heating system boilers or commercial water heaters, basically hot water systems. And for landlords that have them, heated makeup air units. So those are the most common. There's some other newer offerings now, and one that's about to expand. So there's some EV charging rebates. So this is kind of a new thing for the sector. We actually just did our first EV project for a client just recently. And so, yeah, so that's kind of a newer thing, but it is something some landlords, particularly in the higher end buildings, want to be able to start offering EV charging as EVs get more common. And so this will help cover some of those costs. And then there also are some sort of electricity related upgrades as well, or incentives as well. And what incentives there are kind of depend on where you are in the province. And I don't want to get into all the details, it's a little bit complex, but if you get one of those energy assessments through something like the rental apartment efficiency program that Fortis has, it will really outline all of the rebates that would be applicable to your specific building. So those are the main offers. The one I didn't mention is also what we call direct installs. And so the rental apartment program will also provide free supply and installation of high efficiency shower heads and aerators. That typically cuts gas use by about 12% in a building and also reduces water costs. So that's a sort of a relatively simple, and in this case, no cost kind of thing that landlords can do to just get a bit of additional savings right off the bat. And I'll just add one comment. Sometimes when I explain this to people, there's all these sort of free things available, free shower heads, free auditing, free engineering, all these rebates, and people don't quite believe it, or at least they don't really understand why or how a utility would basically be spending money to help their customers buy less of the product that they sell. It seems kind of counterintuitive. And without getting into all the details of utility regulation, essentially the way that it works is that when you get a utility bill, a small part of your utility bill, let's say your gas bill, is the actual cost of the gas itself, the commodity of natural gas. Most of that bill is the cost of getting that gas to you. And so that includes, you know, building gas pipelines and all of the costs of just operating a utility. And the utility makes their profit on that cost, not on the cost of gas. Like the cost of the gas itself, they basically pass through to you essentially at their cost, and they make their money on everything else. Well, all of the cost of running these programs is considered by the regulator to be just part of that cost of running the utility effectively. And so they actually earn a profit on all of the money that they spend on all of these rebates and the cost of, you know, hiring people like us to provide these programs. So then what they're actually incentivized then to help you save energy and to actually spend money on programs that help you save energy. And then what the regulator does is they have a test, basically a cost benefit test, to just see that that spending that the utilities make is cost effective overall. So they basically are looking to see that it is saving the customer, what they call the ratepayer, more money than it's costing the ratepayer. So in other words, we say these programs are free, but a better way to say it would be that you're paying for them whether you use them or not. And so you either don't use them and you're paying for your competitors to become more cost effective than you, or you do use them and you're becoming more cost effective.
That definitely makes sense. Thank you. And then, I mean, same question that I asked Peter is what is the impact on tenants?
So yeah, the impact on tenants, again, it really depends on what exactly it is that you're doing. So for example, with the kinds of upgrades that we're undertaking, typically we're undertaking upgrades on building equipment that is at or near end of life anyway. So we're generally speaking not going to take a 5-year-old heating system and say, let's throw it in the garbage and put something more efficient in. Usually the equipment we're replacing is fairly old. And in fact, for most buildings in BC, the buildings themselves are quite old, and most of the heating and hot water and ventilation equipment in them are also quite old. So one of the real benefits to tenants is just having new, you know, not only more efficient equipment, but just equipment that's newer, less likely to have mechanical failures. So avoiding failure and avoiding disruption is incredibly, incredibly important. I had one landlord we'd been in talks with about replacing their hot water system for almost a year. It was clearly an older system. We never know exactly when it's going to fail. And we finally talked, you know, we just talked and talked and talked, and they weren't really sure if they should move forward with it. And I got a call from them on the afternoon of December 24th saying, my hot water system has died. Can you help me? And the problem is at that point, it's actually really hard to help them because, you know, they just need whatever system is whatever system can be installed tomorrow, that's the system they need. So really a big part of the benefit of this is just getting ahead of those kinds of emergencies so that you can get it, you know, you can avoid those disruptions for the benefit of your tenants. Obviously having tenants who've had a lot of disruption is going to negatively impact you as a landlord as well. And also helps ensure that we have time to really plan out to get a good system that's not just going to operate well today, but that's going to operate well for decades to come, and not just be efficient, but also be very reliable. So that reliability is important. Some of these new systems can also provide better comfort. We see a real problem in apartment buildings of systems that heating systems, the way they operate, tend to overheat some units and underheat other units. And so sometimes we can actually get some improvements in comfort. And you know, even the things like the shower heads that sometimes landlords fear, you know, tenants won't be happy with, we actually have very high satisfaction rates on the whole from tenants for these, and many tenants actually see it as an upgrade. You're taking kind of something old and crappy that they've got and replacing it with something new and shiny. And so, you know, I think with doing all of those things, we can hopefully help give tenants a better experience and more reliability and less disruption.
I mean, that's a very valid point when it comes down to reliability. There's nothing worse than having a system like that go down, and then, I mean, it can't be installed generally in a day. So, you know, that proactive nature certainly is required. So, Peter, a question for you that's come in is about submetering. In terms of water and thermal utilities, what are you able to submeter in a building?
Sure. So, you know, obviously electricity is fairly straightforward. You know, one of the nice features about electricity submetering, our digital meters are significantly smaller in size than what a typical utility would use in terms of their large glass meter banks. So if you're looking at new construction, There's significant floor area that can be saved by using electrical submetering technology versus, sort of a direct metered approach. In terms of other utilities, water submetering is certainly on new construction is very straightforward. Typically, we would have a single hot and a single cold water meter in each suite. In some cases, we would even just have a single cold water meter if there's an in-suite hot water tank. And so that's fairly straightforward. Those meters are quite small, and the water meters actually fit inside the wall cavity of the suite, and we use wireless technology to extract the meter data out of the suite. So there's no hard wiring of the meter. There's no additional wiring within the building. So those again, a nice wireless solution. Just have the water meters in suite. When it comes to thermal metering, one of the nice things that's happened over the last couple of years, we've worked with Measurement Canada probably since around 2008, and finally in 2019, they came out with a Measurement Canada standard for thermal metering. So Measurement Canada now has a federal standard in terms of what a thermal meter must be able to do in terms of its measurement and accuracy. And that is now live. Any thermal metering that is installed now and over the next number of years sort of has to meet that standard. And then in 2026, they will actually ensure that any thermal meters that are installed in the marketplace, even if they were installed 5 years ago, need to meet that standard. So we can measure for in-suite heating and cooling costs if you're using a fan coil or a heat pump system by using those thermal meters. And then if there's natural gas being fed to the individual units, we can also use a small natural gas submeter to pick up the individual in-suite natural gas costs. So we can actually pick up multiple utilities. And all of that in-suite equipment uses wireless communication. And that allows us, again, to extract all that in-suite meter data out of the suite without any dedicated wires, and then back to a central gateway in the building. And we use a cellular connection to get all of our meter data out of the building. So it's very seamless, very doesn't interrupt or have any sort of aesthetic impact on either in suite or in any of the common areas either.
Great. And so, I mean, that kind of leads to the question is, well, what is the cost of electricity and heat and cooling and water energy use in multi-residential buildings?
Yeah, so when it comes to electricity, we have to operate, the BCUC has regulations around the costs, and so long as the electricity costs that we're billing to a resident on an individual monthly basis, they have to be less than what BC Hydro would charge. In terms of how we sort of manage the costs, whatever the costs are on the bulk meter for that particular building, whether it's water, or natural gas, we flow through those rates directly to the residents. The goal of submetering is to ensure that the overall bill to the resident is significantly less than what they would be paying if they were paying the local utility. So I would say on a typical building, if we were metering 3 services, just the administration fees, if you looked at, say, electricity, water, and natural gas, would be about $20 per suite less per month. And then in some cases, we're able to flow through a lower commodity price where, say, natural gas may come in at a slightly lower commodity price on the bulk meter. So the resident benefits from a lower bulk commodity price as well, whether it be water or natural gas in those particular instances. So generally, we would see a resident bill would typically be about 20 or 30% less than what they would be charged if they were being billed directly by each individual utility. Actual costs, a Electricity costs in BC are typically around $40 per suite per month in suite. Water costs range substantially depending on the municipality. Rates vary a lot across the province. Some have some very large fixed sewage fees. So we try to incorporate those into the monthly billing to try and recapture the maximum amount of in-suite costs as possible. And again, the natural gas costs I talked about. So again, the idea of submetering is to ensure that the monthly bill is less than what the residents would be paying for sure if they were being billed direct by the local utilities.
And just to add a little bit to that, we've looked at about 1,000 buildings in terms of gas usage, and some subset of that, I'm not sure, probably a few hundred, where we've looked at the electricity and water as well. One of the studies we did, this was based on Lower Mainland data. We saw a little over $600 a year, roughly, kind of as an average for, like, let's say a 650 square foot apartment as sort of a typical overall utility cost. The vast majority of that cost, about 58%, this isn't submetered, I'm talking now about basically the landlord's cost on a building. So this is basically not counting the tenant's electricity bill, which is relatively low in most BC buildings because most of them have gas heating and gas hot water. So that's not true everywhere. For example, on Vancouver Island, it's more common to have more electricity use. But in the Lower Mainland, it's certainly really common that gas is the bulk of it. It makes up about 58% of what a landlord's paying. Water is the next most expensive at around 30%. That's really surprising to a lot of people. Electricity is only about 12% typically of a landlord's cost. So again, that's not counting like the tenant's BC Hydro bill. So really, it's really all about, for BC landlords in gas-driven buildings, it's primarily about natural gas use and water use. And, a lot of the focus historically people had on like hallway lighting and things like that. There's definitely still good things to address, but they're actually a pretty small piece of the puzzle. And it's really addressing your thermal loads, your basically heating and hot water use, like I said, which are usually gas, and then your water consumption are really where, almost 90% of your a landlord's energy costs typically are.
Hunter, I saw a question came in about district energy systems and how to, pass through any sort of fixed capacity charges. So that goes to the rate setting. If there's a fixed capacity charge to a building, we can pass through that component of the fixed capacity charge on a resident basis, either pro rata based on, per suite, or we can parse out that fixed capacity charge based on the per square footage of the in-suite size of each individual unit. So there's 100% a way to recapture the in-suite component percentage of that monthly fixed capacity charge. We do a fair amount of thermal metering already that are connected to district energy systems. So we're quite familiar with sort of the rate setting process that's required when connected to those systems. And we're big fans of district energy. We think it's certainly the right approach in terms of providing heating and cooling to buildings. Not always 100% in agreement in terms of limiting choice for landlords in terms of how they connect and what they connect to, but generally in favor of more efficient connection systems like district energy.
Great. So we are obviously, as it's been said quite a few times over the last 8 months, in interesting and unique and unprecedented times. And, I'm sure there's no question that there will be some type of impact on energy efficiency programs and upgrades due to COVID-19. So what does that look like? Where are we at with this at the moment?
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to make sort of 2 quick points. It's interesting, when COVID hit, we immediately, pivoted to understanding what is the impact of in-suite energy consumption because of COVID. And our first initial thought was that there was going to be a significant spike on the in-suite electricity use. And in fact, the in-suite electricity use was fairly moderate. There was a small increase, but it wasn't, it was kind of in the 4% range. Interestingly enough, what we did find was in-suite water use shot up by about 30%. And because people were home all day, showering, going to the washroom, and all of those things, all of those water use activities, washing their hands, and so we saw a real significant increase in the in-suite water use. And so obviously our clients that, had submetered for water, all of that was mitigated completely. In terms of sort of where are we going with incentives, I know the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has now been established, and looks like they'll be able to offer some very, and I don't know, Jordan, if you've had any conversations with them. Our initial conversations with them, with some of our partner companies, that they're looking at offering some very low cost loans for energy management upgrades. They're looking to do, large delivery projects in certain areas for sure. But, the last discussion we had with them was sort of in the 1% interest rate loan for a 15-year term, where they would provide a loan up to 80% of the capital required. So interesting that the federal government is stepping up a little bit, and they're ready to start delivering, and I think in February of March or next year. So.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll add a little bit to some of the other COVID impacts, both positive and negative, that we've seen. Yeah, I echo your comments about water use and hot water use going up quite significantly. So that is an impact, and it's actually made it kind of challenging sometimes for our projects. Like, let's say you just replaced a hot water system and you want to see, well, how much energy did you save if everybody's hot water use increased? Sometimes the comparisons become difficult. Normally we don't have big changes in occupancy or things like that in apartment buildings. So normally it's pretty easy to compare across time periods with just some correction for weather variation. But so COVID's had an impact in that sense. But I'll speak both in positive and negative terms, I guess, about some of the things that we've seen. So one, I'll say on the positive side is we have seen an increase in rebates. So Fortis was able to do this. It's quite amazing that they were able to pull this off. But so Fortis, the way they set utility rates, or excuse me, incentive rates, is basically the Utility Commission oversees that. Basically a government regulatory body. So they can't just make the rates, whatever they want. They have to justify how big those rebates are. And of course they have an incentive to make those rebates, reasonably large, but they have to keep them within the limits of what's reasonable. But they've been able to use the fact that COVID's occurred and there's other financial risks out there as a legitimate justification to increase those rebates. So if, I see even some of the names on this call, I might have done a heating or hot water system upgrade with you a year ago. If we were to do that same upgrade again today, we'd actually be able to get a better rebate. I think it's about a third larger on average right now, the rebate values that we can get. So that's on the good side. We hear all this talk about all kinds of new programs, both financing and other rebate programs and funding programs coming down the pipe. We haven't seen them land yet, so I guess I'd say cautiously optimistic about the potential for those, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see. A couple of things that I'll mention, though, in relation to COVID on the negative side. So one of our programs, the Rental Apartment Efficiency Program, which, as I mentioned, includes those audits and implementation support, as well as these direct installs, this basically installation of shower heads and aerators. So we have temporarily put on hold the direct installs in suite, basically just to mitigate risks of COVID transmission. So we can still go out and do the energy audits. We can still do boiler upgrades and ventilation upgrades and sort of any major equipment upgrade. That's all fine, but to mitigate risks, we've agreed with the utility companies to basically stay out of people's individual suites for now. So we're still enrolling people in those programs and doing all the other work, but the direct install piece we're just temporarily putting on hold, and we're just going to sort of watch and see how things progress with COVID and at what point the utilities and everybody sort of feel it's safe to again go into people's homes. We do have very strict protocols around, masks and hand washing and social distancing, and very, very strict protocols that we have with utilities. So, if we are entering a building for something, we absolutely are doing it in a way that's very conscientious. And if there are buildings where people do not want to have anyone coming physically into the building, we also worked with the utilities to develop a methodology this year for doing what we call virtual energy audits, where basically remotely we're able to get information either through photos or video conferencing, where we can basically get the information we need from building owners and managers to conduct those energy audits in a remote way.
So yeah, I mean, no surprise, certainly an impact, but not all is it necessarily negative. So that is good to hear. On the topic of positive impact, I mean, what are the types of upgrades that are worth doing when you're looking at this? Which ones make financial sense? Which makes energy efficiency sense? If I'm trying to be eco-conscious, what makes sense?
So, I'd say the first thing, that the best really way to assess that is to get an energy audit done. And then you can get someone who comes to your building, looks at your equipment, looks at your utility consumption, and can really make a building specific evaluation of that. So I'd say that's the best way to really evaluate it in any specific case. In general terms, I guess I would say a few things. One, the shower head and aerator upgrades are really kind of a no-brainer. The costs of doing them are now fully covered by the utilities, and it's saving you water, it's saving you gas. So it's really a no-brainer. And even if you have a handful of tenants that decide they don't want it and they want to go back to kind of their older, less efficient shower heads, we find that it's less than 10% of people are doing that. You're still getting probably 90% of the potential savings there. I'd say in terms of more major capital expenditures, things like boilers, basically space heating upgrades tend to be sort of the major upgrades, the main one that we see as really being cost effective and improving efficiency. Again, we're typically doing it at a time when the system really is old and needs upgrading anyway. And the benefits there, not only is it more efficient, but it also has much better controls. So the new systems typically have built-in control systems, which allow you to sort of better adjust the system in relation to the building's needs. Older systems tended to kind of over adjust and not really adjust outputs in a way to really appropriately match a building's needs. So I'd say that, and beyond that, I'd say hot water would sort of be the next one, typically not quite as cost effective as space heating, although they've just dramatically increased the rebates for hot water systems. So that's starting to get it to be a bit more cost competitive. And certainly not that many buildings in BC actually have heated ventilation. Typically only the newer apartment buildings do. But if you do have heated ventilation, then certainly the high efficiency ventilation systems really do perform very, very well. And so we've been really happy with the systems that we've been involved in terms of their cost effectiveness. Beyond that, certainly lighting and things like that are always good. If you're in like areas like Kelowna, where you may, let's say, have air conditioning systems, and we do see some buildings with a sort of those really old window shakers or other types of sort of, very, very low efficiency systems. There's some really great opportunities now for sort of packaged heating and cooling heat pump technologies that we're using, again, more in the sort of interior area. And if you're in that area, you'll have Fortis as your electric utility as well. And then there's also some really good rebates that not only improve efficiency, but also maybe you don't have cooling in your building, and this gives you an added feature that you now have cooling. Right. Or maybe you do have cooling, and you've just got a really terrible cooling system.
There you go. Great. So for Peter here, I mean, what are we looking at in terms of things such as utility expense in a pro forma?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly taxes and utilities are some of the biggest line items on on a building's pro forma and financial statements. The in most buildings, I would say roughly about 60% of the total electricity use is probably in suite in a typical rental building. Upwards of 90% of the water use in a typical rental building is in suite, and roughly about 50% of the heating and cooling costs. And Jordan may have some more detailed stats on that. But the nice thing about submetering is it completely offloads all of those in suite costs directly to the user. And we tend to think of it as, you're able to convert you as the owner and manager thinking about energy efficiency every day in your building. You're able to convert your tenants to become energy managers as well. So they start to think about energy efficiency because they're getting a bill every month for their electricity and heating and cooling costs and water costs. And so they start to become small energy managers within the building. So those are some real impacts. And again, the other nice thing about utility submetering on pro formas is it's a complete hedge against future rate increases. So as rate increases are happening, those rate increases are immediately passed through to the residents on their monthly bill. And there's no waiting for adjustments on rent increases on an annual basis. And if rent increases are capped, and utility costs are increasing by a significant amount over that cap, submetering completely protects you against the erosion on your net operating income. So that's the nice thing on when you're looking at the pure financial statements is the recovery of your in-suite utility costs and then hedging against any future rate increases. It's a perfect hedge.
One additional comment I'll make on that is for buildings, excuse me, for buildings where you're using CMHC's mortgage insurance, multifamily mortgage insurance program, there's also a rebate on your premium available if you improve energy efficiency by up to 15%. So if you improve energy efficiency in the building by 15%, you get a 15% reduction on your premium. So this often is something we see clients using, like if it's a new acquisition and they're financing it, or maybe they're doing a refi and they're going to use the CMHC's mortgage insurance program and really get a really competitive rate. Those premiums can be quite substantial, and so that's another way to help lower that premium, and that can really improve the pro forma.
So, Peter, we've talked about how it can be very straightforward when it comes to new construction to submeter a building. What does it look like in an existing building where there's already systems in place?
Yeah, so where there's very much it's site specific. We operate in, as I said, about 2,000 buildings. I can say every single building is different. And really a site specific audit is needed at each building. Some of the older buildings are fairly straightforward to retrofit. And, as I said, very little aesthetic disruption at all to the building. Again, depending on how the building is plumbed, you may have 2 risers per suite, you may have 6 risers per suite, which can create, more meters per suite in terms of water submetering. Thermal metering is fairly straightforward if you've got, a fan coil or heat pump type system in there right now. And the electrical submetering, again, is quite site specific. Sometimes there's shared circuits between suites, so there may be some unwinding of those shared circuits, but generally it's a fairly straightforward installation. But again, a technical audit is ideal before obviously proceeding with any work.
Yeah, so great. That makes sense. And same for you, Jordan. Is what does it look like when it comes to these existing buildings? Is there, or what are the new boilers bigger? Are they smaller? Do they fit? What's happening here?
Sure, yeah. So typically new boilers are a lot smaller than older boilers. And there's a variety of different types of boilers. Some of them are actually wall hung boilers, so that they actually mount directly on the wall. So that can save a ton of space. And even the larger floor mounted boilers are typically a lot smaller, particularly if you're in a building, like you see this a lot in the West End, these big high rises that have old Cleaver Brooks boilers from the 1960s that are just absolutely massive. We've even had a couple of clients who, in replacing the boiler system, we were able to design the system in such a way that they saved so much space that they were actually able to create another suite or expand a suite into what formerly would have been the area taken up by the boiler. So those kinds of space considerations are really, really important. Usually people only think of those in the context of new construction, where we'll look when we're involved in new construction, we'll look at how much space mechanical systems take up. And, with floor space being, an incredibly high value that it is, particularly in areas like Vancouver, in many cases, the floor space is worth way more money than the mechanical equipment's worth. Yeah, definitely we're always looking for those ways to maximize space.
Definitely. Okay, we do have a couple questions that have come in. One question here, perhaps one of you know, for some of those communities that might not have access to natural gas, where would you go?
So I guess we need to look at each building specifically, but it depends on what the energy use is in the building. So we actually just worked on a building that was using an oil heating system. And so it therefore wasn't, it wasn't a customer of Fortis and wasn't eligible for Fortis rebate programs. We were able to do an upgrade on that building. In that case, we just worked directly for the owner, and they basically just hired us as a consultant to assist them with the upgrades to that building. If you are on oil, there are some opportunities for rebates, and there's some programs through provincial funding that's really focused on greenhouse gas reductions through what's called Clean BC, basically provincial funding for moving people to cleaner energy and getting large GHG reductions. So there's some funding through that program there. If the building is 100% electric, the options are a little bit more limited. There are some kinds of utility rebates through BC Hydro, but unfortunately, some of their programs aren't applicable to multifamily buildings. So your opportunities may be a little bit limited. So it really depends on the specific building. Maybe you're using propane, maybe you're using oil, maybe you're all electric. So it really depends, but I'd certainly be happy to chat with you offline about your specific situation and sort of help you figure out what the opportunities are there.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you both for your time today, and thank you again to our sponsors for today's webinar, Fortis BC and Wyse Meter Solutions. Stay tuned to your e-news for more information about our up-to-date webinars and the ones that are coming up. We actually do have one more question that's come in, specifically about EV charging station. I just wanted to get this out because it is a great question that I think we can definitely answer right now, which is what is the general startup cost on these? Are they stations meter, coin operated? What do they look like?
So yeah, I wish I had the numbers in front of me. We did a study, it's probably about 4 years ago, I guess now, or 3 years ago, looking at, there was a huge range in the different buildings that we looked at. So it's a hard question to just answer as sort of an average. We saw like a 300%, I think, variation in cost between different buildings. And often it was just in relation to like the room on the electrical panel and where the electrical room was in relation to where you wanted the EV charging stations, or EVSEs as we call them. So if you're in a high rise and you're in a parkade, you've got to be coring through layers of concrete, the costs go dramatically up. But I mean, I think you're probably in the, I'd have to look, but in a reasonably easy situation, you could be at something like several $1,000s a unit for charging equipment. But as I said, there's a huge range. And in terms of, are they metered or coin operated? There's a number of different ways to do it. You typically can get a separate utility account for these, and especially in a larger building, that's really something you want to carefully consider, is how you structure the utility accounts. So for example, if you're on let's say that Hydro's what's called their LGS, or large general service rate, you not only pay for the amount of energy you use, you pay for your basically energy demand. You're basically paying for sort of the peak amount of energy you use. So what we've seen is that in some cases, the EVs, although they actually don't consume really that much electricity, it's amazing how little electricity they use. But when they use electricity, they're using a lot of it potentially at one moment. So that can cause this very, very high demand charge. So depending on your rate structure, you may want to look at having it separately metered from the rest of the building. But in other rate classes, that wouldn't matter. But yeah, there are different options of technologies. So we do see some people, I wouldn't say coin operated per se, but there are ones where people can pay by credit card or can have an account. And there are ways that you can do that, so you have a user pay model. I believe in this last one that we did for a landlord recently, what they, I think, just decided to put it in a space and then basically just rent out that space. They didn't really charge for the energy, they just charged a premium to have a space that has EV charging. And because the spaces don't, the meters, or the charging, the EVs don't use that much electricity. It actually, they easily make the money back on basically the cost of the space.
That makes sense.
I can just, one thing I just want to add to that, so certainly metering the EV charger itself can be easily done through a single point sort of wireless meter. We find that to be pretty cost effective. It allows the landlord to put in an EV charger that doesn't have doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of smarts in it in terms of SIM card communication or monitoring or tracking, and you can bill the resident directly for the actual energy use that they're using in their designated parking spot. For visitor parking, you're looking at a more sophisticated sort of communication system that would use a cloud-based platform for billing. But I would say, generally an EV charger costs are coming down for the hardware. You could probably get a designated parking charger just for the charger itself in the $1,000 range. And for a more sort of robust visitor parking system, you might be as high as $3,000 or $4,000 per charger. But there's certainly ways to reduce the costs and then get those residents paying for exactly what they're using.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say with the main costs on those systems, the install costs typically mostly relate to what's going on in the electrical room, the electrical panel, and where that is in relation to where you want the equipment. It's really those install costs that typically make up like the bulk of the cost, and the actual system itself and putting in a simple submeter or something like that is probably relatively inexpensive compared to the total cost of the project. So it's really site specific. So you might even want to think about, well, maybe it's not just, well, I'm going to put it in that particular unit over there because that particular tenant is the one who wants it. It's probably best to start looking at, okay, where is the best spot in the building to put this, just relative to where our electric equipment is.
Perfect. Okay, well, I know there are other questions have been coming in. We're going to close it up today, and we'll reach out to individuals who may have asked some questions throughout that we didn't get to. So thank you again, Jordan and Peter, for your time today. Thank you to all our attendees for your attention and for your thoughtful questions. And again, stay tuned to the LandlordBC e-news for information about upcoming webinars. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hunter. Jordan, thanks for joining, and
Thanks,
appreciate everyone's time.